Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master, and I'm doing a video today about the censorship of modern day and how it's not that different than back in the day with censorship, as far as the same types of people and personality types and so forth, and how it's almost like a secular version of these people from the 80s and the Satanic Panic, because you have I'm just going to be straight and honest about this. So, back in the Satanic Panic days, there were people that were in satanic cults. I don't know if there were tons of murders, but, there was like this cult in the late 70s in Illinois that was really creepy, called themselves a satanic cult, you know, and I'm kind of I'm a Satanist adjacent person. I'm definitely not a Satanist because of certain things that I am not as keen on. I'm a little too new age, fluffy, airy fairy to go down that totally dark road. But I read books about LaVey, and I enjoy a lot of his remarks about society, and I do like a lot of his ideas. I never, it's since the '90s, because what happened was I grew up very Christian, sort of new age Christian, like not from my parents or family, but I was kind of into that. I was into like Nostradamus, the Book of Revelations. I thought the world would end in the '90s or whatever, in the '80s or whatever, when I was a little kid. I was obsessed with that. I believed in God, but it was like it's sort of more universalist, Unitarian thing, like all religions teach part of the truth, but Satanists, yo, man. So that ended up with me throwing away a bunch of albums when I was like a teenager, because I think it was partly an OCD kind of thing. But anyways, won't go into that in this video. I think I've already talked about that a little bit, but I may in the future. So the whole thing is these types of like lily white upper middle class women of varying political stripes, that supposedly different political stripes, but they were all the same. They all got together and formed the PMRC, and that was like the censor. You call it censorship. Well, requiring people to label their albums kind of backfired, but originally a lot of it was very much evangelical influenced, because we're going to do different kinds of labels for different types of lyrics. Like, for example, O for occult. I'm doing the alt-right symbol. So now, though, I believe like wokeism is like the new Christianity. It's like, if you don't follow, if you're not pure enough in this thing, you get canceled, or pushed out of the tribe, or pushed out of your. It's like it's kind of the same thing, because it's a lot of the same types of, it says like a lot of the same archetypes, like Karens. You watch the movie, and I know people don't like this movie, but I actually enjoyed it, because I had a relative that told me I like it, and I was like, oh god, no. And then I borrowed it. I'm like, really good. It was pretty good. And it's a version of a musical, Broadway musical, Rock of Ages. I enjoyed the movie, I'm sorry, but Catherine Zeta-Jones is that kind of Karen, like PMRC type. But now it's become this type of thing where they're into identity politics and fighting disinformation. But like I said, there is disinformation out there, and there is a lot of QAnon and a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of bullshit out there, but people believe it because the more the other side pushes, the more they can say, see, they're trying to censor us, see, it makes them into martyrs. So that's the political element of that. Now, the PMRC, the thing is with all that stuff, so there were satanic cults. Metalheads, and metal musicians and fans were way more, want to call it degenerate, or they're, I'm not going to use degenerate. Well, what's the other word? I'm just trying to think. They were way more into indulging in certain things. Like my grandmother, when I first bought an Iron Maiden tape, she's like, "Oh, all those people are into drugs." She actually watched the Geraldo Satanic Panic special and didn't want me to get into metal, but I did. Yeah, I'm still into metal. Sorry, years or decades later. So that whole thing, like, oh yeah, well there were bad things that metalheads did. They were probably more likely to come from a broken home or all these things, but rather than talk about what causes a broken home or what causes drug abuse or what causes people to go into those things, they want to blame heavy metal. So instead of, it's the same thing with these types nowadays, like Taylor Lorenz and all these people. I mean, she would be, if it was 40 years before, she would be called Tipper Gore. Let's just face it. So this is the new thing to go against. It's like, oh my God, the alt right and all this stuff, and it does exist. Just like I said, just like with satanic cults existed. People did do a lot of weird shit in their life. People do drugs. My brother, I mean, people, like he hung out with. They stole BMX bikes and put them in my dad's porch. You know, I mean, and had a shop. People did bad shit. They were delinquents and stuff, and metalheads were, especially in the 80s. There was that. I mean, you could say that there was. I mean, there probably weren't subliminal messages telling people to kill themselves, but metal was kind of appealing to a crowd that wasn't exactly the most academically proficient, just to say. So this whole thing about the censorship and what the argument is, well, the PMRC used to say, and those types used to say, well, it's not government censorship, they're free to do the labeling if they want to, blah, blah, blah. And that's what they say about the social media platforms. Oh, they're free to not be on the platform, or blah, blah. It's like the same fucking rationalizations and mental gymnastics they used to tell people in the 80s about music and movies and later video games. So it's the same types of people that are going after the same thing, but instead of being Christian, they're that's not the cool thing. The cool thing is to be woke, but in this corporatist, like, apologetic way, because it's like, you don't notice they talk about, like, they're not the same people that are calling from the Starbucks union. They do converge to some extent. Like, oh, someone calling for the Starbucks union or Amazon to unionize. They're not talking about. They're not. It does. They do cross pollinate to some extent some of those crowds, but not as much as this, like, neoliberal corporatist kind of apologetic group that reads New York Times, Washington Post, watches CNN. But those people are the same people. It's the same type of person as the PMRC and those white Karen liberal. I mean, they weren't as liberal in the 80s. There were a lot more Republicans involved in that. But it's the same type of people calling for that shit today. And the same type of, and when they say that I'm, problematic for wanting freedom of speech and all this stuff, it's like, well, and that's not how they frame it. Just like in the 80s, they didn't frame it as that, well, we're trying to protect the children. We're trying to protect the children. We're trying to protect people from disinformation, from them taking horse medicine, horse dewormer. It's like the same fucking bullshit, and you have the same kind of thing, but it makes things worse. That's the thing, or it backfires. It's just like in the 80s, like, oh, we're gonna have labeling on records. It's not censorship, even though the government is telling you what something that you should do. And you did that, and then the whole thing just backfired, because what were the biggest selling albums of the late 80s, early 90s, when after all that stuff came to be? I mean, parental advisory, explicit lyrics. Remember when Ice-T's OG Original Gangster came out? It had a huge label on it, it said parental advisory, explicit lyrics. And you had stuff like that. But the people that were fighting back then against the PMRC were people like Jello Biafra, Ice-T, people like that. They were fighting that, and it was beautiful to see. So, but where are those people now? I don't know. I mean, where's Jello Biafra now about that? It kind of sold out. But the people that you're talking about that now, Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi or, Breaking Points or whoever, these people, as far as talking about the current crop of censorship, and it's not like, the mentor, a 6-year-old should listen to a mentor's record or something. It's not a matter of like you want this thing, or on, talking about the modern day equivalent, you don't want people, to spread QAnon bullshit, but you're just making things worse by censors misinformation boards or disinformation boards and all this stuff, talking about the government getting involved with, or what was the chick's name? I can't remember, but she said, you should be able to edit people's tweets and all this stuff. It's like, holy shit, that is just like completely off the wall. And the big tech companies have a monopoly on people's, viewpoints and stuff, because they spread the information that we see. It's not like Truth Social is like the biggest platform right now or something like that. But they're only feeding into the disinformation by trying to fight disinformation. It's like the war on drugs. When were the worst years of crack usage and abuse in America? It was like the late 80s, early 90s. And that was when the drug war had ramped up with all the mandatory minimum sentences and all this stuff. It's like, the more you fight something in certain ways, the worse it gets. Just like the last 2 years. Look at all the attempts to clamp down something never really stopped something from happening. I'm not going to talk about what that is. Of course, people that watch my videos know what I'm talking about. But it's just like, you can't really fight. I mean, you can't fight disinformation by calling anything that is, deviates a little bit disinformation. When you're spreading disinformation for years about wars, about, politicians in the mainstream media, that's been the whole thing. The Iraq war is the example I go back to, but it's just so odiously normalized now that, oh yeah, well, yeah, we just thought that they had weapons of mass destruction, even though all the intelligence report, or half the intelligence reports said they didn't, and there was all that Valerie Plame thing. Oh, we just were naive. So, I don't think in this current climate that we need to. I think in this current climate that we do need to fight these people, because they are the same people. They are the same people. They're this, they're this suburban, like mom kind of thing that they watch this mainstream news, and they want to clamp down on people's freedom of speech. And the way to fight disinformation a lot of the times is to, as much as I want to, people might not like this, what I'm going to say, is to ignore it. Because when was Alex Jones the biggest? When the media started talking about him all the time, back in 1990, or back in like 2002 or 2003, was Alex Jones even half the rich guy he is now? No. And people were just, oh, Alex Jones, whatever. People didn't even talk about him. John Ronson talked about it because he wrote a book about some of that stuff. But that was on the fringe. But you normalize it by talking about it all the time. You normalize Trump by talking about him all the time. And you popularize heavy metal and rap by talking about it all the time. Talking about how much of a threat it is. It's like, people will be intrigued. It's like, oh, what? Whoa, why is it a threat? So we'll go into that. So you're making the problem worse by fighting it. Essentially, you're making your problem worse. Just the disinformation thing. But these people are the same. The same type of, this do-gooder kind of moral busybody, smug type of suburban white, a lot of times women, be like Taylor Lorenz and stuff, that wants to control people's thoughts and thinks that they know what's best for society. Marjorie Taylor Greene is crazy, all right? Mike Lindell basically acts like he's on crack, all right? Donald Trump is just a joke, right? That's fine. But you're not going to stop those people by saying that, if even if you like go even an inch towards like saying that Biden is bad or he did this, or or Russia is not, was not involved with the election in 2016 as much as people said. You're not gonna, by saying those people are spreading misinformation, or by questioning the virus narrative at all. Like when fucking Newsom goes to a restaurant when he's locked down his state and you know not wearing a mask and stuff. When you question any of that stuff and you call it, oh, that's misinformation, disinformation, who controls the narrative? They're trying to control the narrative of what is happening. When you're making those things worse because you're essentially trying to suppress something by giving it more exposure. That's what you're doing, and I mean, that's why the midterms are going to be such a bloodbath. But that's about all.